In this video, we are going to learn about the Apex triggers. If you do not know about what are the different database operations available in Apex to perform or how to perform those operations, we would recommend you clicking on the I button link and watching that video where we have explained these things which are essential to understand the concepts that we will cover in this video. So let's get started. Before we try to understand the Apex triggers, we need to understand the database triggers. So, what are the database triggers? Database triggers are the events that are attached to every table that informs to us whenever there is a database operation like insert, update or delete happening on a table. In Salesforce also, whenever we perform such DML operations on standard or custom objects, these events are triggered. Salesforce allows us to associate custom Apex code to these events so that whenever these events are triggered, our Apex code will get executed automatically. This concept is called or known as Apex triggers. Let's go ahead and create an Apex trigger in Salesforce. For this, we need to go to the Developer Console and need to create an Apex trigger component. While creating the component, we need to specify the name of the trigger and select the S object, that is the standard or custom object that the trigger will be associated to. It's always a good practice to name the trigger according to the API name or labels of the objects that they are or will be associated to. Also, we should append the word trigger at the end. For example, in this case, we have named our Apex trigger as account trigger. The reason that we should append the word trigger at the end is to identify the component as trigger easily by just looking at the name of the component. You can see that the Developer Console has created this sample code before we can add our own. If you know the syntax of a class in Apex, you can spot the difference in the syntax very easily here. The code starts with the keyword trigger, followed by the name of the trigger that we specified while creating the component. Then we have the keyword on, which is then followed by the API name of the object which we selected in the previous section, which is account. When we have the opening and closing brackets which has before and insert written in it. The before is the event and insert is the trigger. This means that this Apex code will get executed before a record of account is inserted into the database. The event could be either before or after. However, the triggers could be any of the database operations that are supported by Apex, which are insert, update, upsert or delete in general. So let's go ahead and specify the events and triggers in this bracket. For our example, we will have before insert, before update and after update. This means that this code will get executed during insert and update before and after the corresponding DML operations are performed on the records. Let's go ahead and write some logic in this trigger. Now, if you see the code, we have used the if and if else conditional blocks to print the messages in Apex logs. You will also notice that we have used a keyword trigger with the variables with dot notations as isBefore or isInsert, etc. These are called as trigger context variables. These variables will hold values only when a trigger gets executed. The value that these context variables hold is Boolean, that is either true or false. So the way we have written this if, else and the system.debug statements, we want this code to print the values whenever a particular event and trigger happens. Let's go ahead and try executing this trigger to see what will be the output. Now, since this is a trigger, we will not be able to call it from the execute anonymous Apex like initializing class objects and calling the methods using either object or class names. Since this trigger code will get associated to the objects, we will need to perform DML operations on the objects to execute this code. So we will first insert one account record. Since we want to inspect the Apex logs, we will check the checkbox open log before we click on the execute button. After the execution is successful, we will filter the logs by debug only and see that the texts insert before and insert after were only printed. This is because the trigger got executed during before insert and after insert events. Now let's go ahead and try updating the same account that we created. You will notice that in the Apex logs, we have texts update before and update after. This means that the trigger code got executed during the update only. Also, if you notice in the sequence that these logs were printed, the before part got printed first, then the after part was printed. The logs are generated in the correct sequence in which the code that gets executed. From this example, we can conclude that the before part of the trigger gets executed first and then the after part. Another set of important trigger context variables that we need to know about is the list and map variables. The number of records of an object on which the DML operation is performed are received by the Apex trigger in these context variables. Trigger.new. This is a list variable which holds the records that are changed in this DML operation. Trigger.old. This is a list variable which holds the records with the old values before they were changed in this DML operation. Trigger.newMap. This is a map variable which will hold the records that were changed in this DML operation. The key will be the ID of the record while the value will be the changed sObject record. Trigger.oldMap. This is again a map variable which will hold the records with the old values that were changed in this DML operation. Similar to the new map, the key here will be the record ID and value will be the old copy of the changed sObject record. Let's try to understand this concept with an example. For this, we will fetch a couple of account records from the database and using for loop, we will update the name fields. Once done, we will click on execute and start inspecting the Apex logs. Even if we have written the system.debug statement 4 times in the code, in the logs we can see 8 instances of it. This is because the trigger was executed twice because of the before and after events that we had specified. If you observe the Apex logs as we have highlighted in the trigger.old, the name field had a value test account 2. In the next statement trigger.new, it got changed to test account 2 -updated. This is how we can use trigger.new and trigger.old to compare the old and new values and write our logic around it. Also, you will notice that the trigger.old and trigger.new started with bracket account colon curly brace id is equal to. This is because these are the lists. Account here indicates the type of the list. This is how the Apex logs are printed by the system.debug statement. If you notice the trigger.oldMap and trigger.newMap, the text is starting with bracket 001 followed by some random characters is equal to account colon starting or opening curly brace id and the rest of the text. This is because these are maps. As we saw earlier that new map and old maps are maps. In the keys there will be record IDs and in the values it will be the sObject records. So 001 and the rest of the random characters is the record ID and is equal to account is representing the type of object it is holding in the value side of the map.
If you like this video, please do like and share. If you want to receive more of such informative content, please hit the subscribe button. If you want us to make content related to any Salesforce or Salesforce related topic, please do let us know through comments.